So,
Oh, go ahead. I sat on their backs just years and years ago.
Generation.
Like, they look big on TV, you get there and it's like,
and hitting.
yes,
No,
yes,
you
it
don't,
is.
you don't get a sense of that on TV.
George Lucas, you mean?
Physical size of them, how much contact there is, how fast they are.
Guys that look thin on TV, but they're 6'8" thin. Big, strong dudes.
They're all freaks in nature. I mean, they're all just.
Basically, he read everything I sent him and is running the whole meeting on the 9th instead of me.
He's just shooting. It's like me and you shooting a 4-footer.
He made the
Just everything.
reservation at the library. Made the meeting. Was making the agenda. Read all of the things.
I was,
Was doing.
I think the last, I was like 4 rows up, right at midcourt for a Bulls playoff game. Timid with the coach. And Bulls was our guy. The Bulls were good. Really, I was surprised how much interaction. I had great coaches. It really mattered.
Yeah, man.
Every time we'd have the ball,
I'm pretty sure it's today.
the coach and getting the play. Every single play. If it
Happy
wasn't-
birthday
If it wasn't a fifth,
to you.
every single play. Yeah, it was good.
He didn't hear.
You didn't hear?
Or he's pretending to ignore it.
I think it is. Happy birthday
It's the birth of.
to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Brian Conroy. Happy birthday to you.
Where's this leak?
Not me.
Need to plug a leak somewhere.
Hopefully that wasn't on TV there, George.
Happy birthday, Brian.
If you could all put on your microphones, we're ready to get started. Okay, good evening. The hour being 6:54 PM on Monday, February 28, 2022. I'd like to call to order the Committee of the Whole meeting of the Village of Brookfield. Bridget, can we have a roll call for this meeting?
Trustee Ketchmark.
Here.
Trustee Cote.
Here.
Trustee Hendricks.
Here.
Trustee Conroy.
Here.
Trustee Lucy.
Here.
President Garvey.
Here.
And Trustee David Leclerc is absent.
Okay, thank you, Bridget. We have 2 items to discuss tonight. The first is a continued discussion regarding the options for Grant Avenue widening as part of the 2022 street improvement project, and tied into that, at the board's direction, we asked Derek and staff to look at ways to improve the safety of the intersection at Prairie and Grant. So I'm going to turn it over to Derek at this point, and I think Derek might actually start with the Prairie and Grant site triangle analysis that he did.
Sure, thank you, President Garvey. Good evening. So we have come here the last 2 committee meetings to present some options on the Grant Avenue widening. The last meeting, we were asked to bring back another option, to look into an option that had 7 foot of parking on the south side. And as President Garvey mentioned, we also looked into the site triangle analysis. So I'm going to start out with the site triangle analysis because I think it ties the whole intersection together. Is depending what we do here, we will probably affect some of the parking on Prairie, and that may or may not affect how we decide to move forward with Grant Avenue widening. So on the first exhibit here, and I apologize, I know these are kind of small exhibits to look at on a screen, but I wanted to give you an idea of what a site triangle analysis is. So we have the blue cars on Grant, and what the analysis consists of is those dashed red lines represent the line of vision for the driver in those vehicles on Grant. And there's a set distance that the cars are set back from the intersection of Grant. And in this case, the speed limit is 30 miles per hour out there, so those vehicles are 335 feet away from the vehicles on Grant. What we did then is we project the dashed line from the line of sight of the vehicle on Grant to the car on Prairie, and wherever that intersects the parking lane, which is shown as a gray tone here, that is where we theoretically would need to end parking if we were going to maintain that sort of a sight distance. I'm going to say something, I titled this IDOT requirement, and it's really more of a recommendation. This is in their design manual, but as I looked at how much parking this affected on side streets, I looked at other side streets in our area, but also in other towns. And there's two requirements. This is your site requirement based on the site triangle. There's also the manual uniform traffic control devices called MUTCAD. And what that states is that parking can start no closer than 20 feet from a crosswalk. And that's what Prairie Avenue was designed to. That's what Maple, that's what Grand, that's what most of the streets are in the area are designed to. I looked at the site triangles. It affects parking for almost 200 feet away from the intersection. I looked at the site triangles, how it's applied to some of the larger IDOT roads in the area. And I looked at Roosevelt Road by our office. Parking typically starts 20 to 30 foot from the crosswalk. I looked at Roosevelt Road down by Harlem. They have some on-street parking, 20 to 30 feet from the crosswalk. And I think we're all familiar with Madison Street and Forest Park has some on-street parking. Again, not set back 200 feet. So it doesn't lead to what I am consider a realistic result in an urban area. I will mention, I also looked at what is the accident history out here. So IDOT publishes a 5-year accident history. The most recent covered the years 2016 to 2020. And the accidents at this intersection, we've had 2. One was a turning accident, which isn't typically associated with sightline distances. And one was what they call an angle accident. That's where the front of the car hits the side of another car. That is typically associated with a line of sight distance issue. Whenever we review this accident history, I like to point out it reflects number of accidents. It doesn't reflect near misses. We know there's a bit of an issue. Staff has mentioned it, elected officials when we talked about it. We know that because, and I think it's partly due to the density of the parking. A lot of times when we have this much parking stripe, we don't get all of this parking all the time. I noticed particularly that northeast corner. When I looked at Google Earth, when I've been out there a few times, it's always full of cars. So there's always an obstruction. These same site triangles would apply to other intersections on Prairie and Maple that aren't governed by a stop sign or a light on Maple or Prairie. And yet we know down at, for instance, Jackson and Prairie, this really isn't an issue when we're making these turns. And I think the reason for that is that we just don't have this level of parking at those other intersections. Go to the next exhibit. So I put another exhibit together, and what I did, I took another engineer out, and I wanted to come up realizing that was a heck of a lot of parking for us to be losing. And by the way, before I get into it, I did put a summary together, and I'll go over that summary at the end. I know I'm not going over the data of how much parking. I want to look at them all together. I think it'll be easier to understand for the board. But we put another exhibit together. It's, again, on the screen, difficult to see, but it's shown in green. And what I did is I had the other engineer go out, and we moved in about 20-foot increments, starting where the parking is now, and then moving back 20 feet at a time. I was parked at Grand Avenue, and I was trying to determine what was a more comfortable sight distance, realizing that the current parking arrangement didn't really leave enough reaction time. And what it generally resulted in is if we eliminated about 60 feet, which is approximately 3 cars of parking from each of the intersections, we get improved sight distances. And I will give those numbers out in a minute here. It's not something that met the IDOT recommendations, but it's something that I thought would provide a better level of comfort, and also realizing we've only had the 2 accidents in the 5-year period that's last been studied. And then I have a chart, and I apologize, I will send this to staff tomorrow. Did not get it on the board packet nor on this slide presentation, but just for comparison. So Grant Avenue, for the westbound traffic, the sight distance to the north is currently 98 feet. The IDOT requirement, IDOT is the same in all directions, it's 335 feet. And with my recommended, if we eliminate the 60-foot of parking, it's 226 feet. So almost double of what we have out there, yet not meeting the IDOT recommendation. Again, Grant westbound traffic, sight distance to the south is currently 80 feet. IDOT requirements 335. With the recommended eliminating the 3 spots, we would have a sight distance of 162 feet. That's double what's out there now. Next, looking at Grant for eastbound traffic, the existing sight distance is 97 feet. IDOT remains 335. And recommended, with the recommended striping, we'd have a sight distance of 180 feet. So not quite double the 97 feet of existing. And then the sight distance to the south for eastbound traffic is currently 99 feet. IDOT 335. With the recommended striping, it'd be 225, so a little over double.
Derek, I appreciate you. The microphone's still working? Mine working? I thought while Derek was talking, I heard his mic, and it doesn't seem like. We'll just pause for a moment, please.
Is my singing that bad?
Yeah.
Yeah, it
You
was.
turned it off after you
I know.
started singing.
They cut the mic because of my singing, Brian.
Yeah, good job, Ed.
I don't blame them.
Please tap your mic.
Test. Okay. Derek, could you try speaking into yours?
Here.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, that seems to be working now.
Start all over.
Not sure Tim's is, but.
Okay. Derek, as I said, I appreciate these drawings, and this came up in the context of talking about the widening of Grant and the board's observations, and I appreciate your point that, the accident count is surprisingly low, but I think anecdotally, we're all familiar with that, and probably each of us has been involved in near misses over there, so I think there's something we definitely need to do there, and it ties into the other topic that we have tonight, because of it seems any improvement that we're going to make to the sight lines and safety of the intersection of Prairie and Grant will result in, or be made possible by, the reduction in parking to improve the sight lines. So whatever direction the board chooses to go with in terms of improving the sight lines and changing in parking will obviously affect the parking on Grant, going forward. But you started it struck me when you started your whole presentation about that it was based on, the sight lines were based on the speed limit and the intersection. I mean, one of the things that's come up before is a stop sign possible at that location. Is that?
Correct. Again, the difficulty with that is, stop signs anywhere in the town are supposed to be based on a stop sign study and pedestrian counts, items like that. In particular, because Prairie is designated as a collector route, that's something that when we do improvements on it, IDOT's gonna review the stop signs for the warrant. A new stop sign should meet the warrants, and I don't believe we have the pedestrian counts to meet the warrant for a stop sign.
The other thing you mentioned was the supposition that the sight lines were based on the speed of 30 miles per hour. Do we have any flexibility in the speed of Prairie Avenue at that point?
We may. So again, as a collector route, typical minimum speed limit is 30 miles per hour. 10 years ago, IDOT was they were more reluctant to give a waiver, a variance, and allow you to go to 25 miles an hour. As of late, they've been more likely to give that variance. So we could look at going to a reduced speed limit of 25 miles per hour. What that does is you obviously have more reaction time, and just based on the design chart, it shortens the IDOT's recommendations by 55 feet. That's almost, if you figure about 20 foot per space, that's almost 3 spaces. So That's something we could look at. You typically, when you do, you look at speed limits on a collector, you do what's called a speed study, and you basically go out there, you put sensors out there to determine the speed, and you're looking at the 85th percentile. And the example I like to use is, we could take a big wide road, Grand Boulevard, Prairie, and we could sign it at 20 or 15, but cars are gonna go much faster just based on the lane width. So there is a, we'll call it a happy medium, where you don't wanna get too far below where traffic currently
Sure.
travels, the speed they travel.
Okay. Questions or comments from the board on this particular intersection?
Derek, the sight lines, what width of Grant are they taking into account? Is it what's there now, or, because it would move where that car is, right? If we widen it the complete width, that pushes those cars farther north or south compared to if there was only one through lane, right?
I believe they stay either the same or very similar on the options, which I haven't presented, but in general, on these options, we're looking at the center of the right-of-way is also the center of the through lanes. The only one where it's slightly different, we presented an option C, and it might make about a 3-foot difference, which wouldn't be significant in the overall triangle.
But if we look at, I think it's option A, with the full width restoration, doesn't that shift us 7 feet? Does that, I mean, do we pick up part of a car that way? Wouldn't that vehicle, if you were heading east, wouldn't that vehicle on Grant be 7 feet further south? You know what I'm saying? I mean, do we pick up anything with that?
Even 7 feet, I believe, would be relatively insignificant in the
Okay.
triangle over 335, but I don't think that's true because, so right now, a eastbound car would be, if we talk about it in relation to the center line, it would be somewhere in that southern east 11 foot of the pavement that exists now.
Okay.
And on option A, there's an 11-foot lane, dedicated through lane for the eastbound traffic that starts at the center line and goes 11 feet to the south. If we, could you go
'Cause of the
one
bump
back,
out.
one where the vehicles are to start?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the center line of the right-of-way, the center line of the pavement on this option A is, yes, right where Tim's floating the cursor. And that's essentially where the center line of the existing pavement is also.
So is the sight line looking at the center line of the pavement, or is it looking?
No, it's looking at where the vehicle is, it's the center of the car.
Which is only a couple feet different, right? Because of the bump out, the parking may be 7 foot in, but because of the bump out, the car is still gonna be at that closer
Right.
in.
Bottom line is, these through lanes are staying essentially where the through lanes now are at the intersection.
No, but I guess my point was, on the north side of that, you're picking up 7 feet more of street. So doesn't that increase, by increasing the width of the street, is
But
that
that's where
7
the
feet?
cars are parked. And forgive me if I'm missing this, but if ignore the parked cars on Grant, but the through lanes are remaining essentially right where they're at. So
Right.
the cars-
My point was, if we add the 7-foot parking lane on the north side, does that count towards some of the spots we would actually lose, parking spots? Because you're now, you see what I'm saying? Your street's 7 feet wider, so isn't that 7 feet part of the 3 parking spots that you'd lose? So maybe,
The parking spots on Grant, you're asking?
no,
about?
on Prairie.
No, because the parking starts like 20 foot north of the right-of-way on Prairie, at least 20 feet. So any improvements you do
Doesn't
on
push
Grant
that at
don't
all.
affect where the parking on Prairie starts.
Okay.
But if Grant is, I understand what he's paying. You're making Grant wider, so now if it starts at 20, now it's only 13 feet back.
Well, I'm going 20 feet from, I see, okay, it's 20 feet from the crosswalk. So picture the back of the sidewalk about where the right-of-way is. So we're not changing that at all on Grant. We're talking about widening the pavements within the sidewalks.
Okay.
But the 20-foot actually starts from the,
take away the parking.
call it the back of walk, that's about where the crosswalk is. I see,
Okay.
I wouldn't understand as the question.
Other questions or comments from the board about this proposal? I mean, Derek, do you need something on this tonight? Because obviously, I don't know, I don't want to speak for the board, if the speed changes and if that changes anything, I mean, again, trying to lay out the options for the board, we could do nothing, we could leave the intersection as it is, but any improvement in the sightlines and safety requires the elimination of some parking. To go with the IDOT recommendation of 28 spaces, you could see what we would have to take away. If you want to go with Derek's recommendation, there's lesser parking spaces, and if Derek can come back with issues on the speed waiver, but is there anybody on the board that wants to leave it exactly the way as it is now, or is there a general consensus that we're willing to sacrifice some parking on Prairie to improve those sightlines?
Can I ask one more question about the stop sign? I'm sorry. You said being a collector's route, in order to qualify for a stop sign on Prairie, it's based on pedestrian traffic more than vehicular?
There's many warrants, okay, that you need to meet. So vehicular traffic across the side street is one of them. I didn't research that before. We don't meet that. I mean, I think it's 100 in an hour, if I think I'm right about that. But I can send Tim an email and send that information to him. And then pedestrian, sometimes you can get a stop sign if you have a school letting out, but it's got to be significant to justify a stop sign.
Okay.
Other questions, Trustee Conroy?
No.
So how does the board, I mean, I'm just looking for some direction. Are we looking to move forward with some improvements to this intersection? Is there anyone in favor of leaving as it is?
I'd like to improve the sightlines.
Okay. Trustee Cote?
I agree.
Okay. Trustee Conroy?
Yeah, no, I definitely think it needs better sightlines
Okay.
on Prairie. That's,
And I think I got head nods from Trustee Ketchmark and Trustee Hendricks. I'm just trying to, so there is some thought of moving forward with some improvements which involve the changes in the parking. So maybe that likelihood of a waiver on the speed limit, I'm not going to pin the board down tonight or ask them, but I mean, if that was an option to reduce the speed limit at that area to 25 that's something that the board, I would assume, want to know, and maybe it would factor into how many spaces we do want to eliminate on Prairie going forward.
I think it could be good information, but I'm not sure that it would change my opinion on this. I appreciate the information that you gave us. For me, I would prefer to go with the recommended improvement rather than the IDOT improvement or any sort of speed limit change.
So not go with the IDOT recommendation, go with Derek's recommendation for the loss of lesser spaces, but improving the sightlines, okay. But would you want to know or be open to the possibility of doing that in conjunction with lowering the speed limit, or?
Well, information's always good, but I wonder if it's practical to try and reduce the speed limit there.
Sure. How does the rest of the board, again, I'm just trying to give Derek direction on where to go next.
I think the reduced speed limit could be valuable because there are a lot of houses around there, but I don't know, I can't see how it reduce, or how many more spaces that would reduce. Would it be one less space, or?
Yeah, so it reduces the, I don't know, it might be one less space. That's a gut feel because it reduces it by 55 feet, but that's not 55 foot of parking. It's that diagonal line on the exhibit would be to a car that's 55 feet closer to the intersection.
Mm-hmm.
So one car is probably a fair estimate.
I don't think that reducing the speed limit in reality is going to impact I don't think reducing the speed limit is going to truly impact this rate of travel that people are driving down that street. I think it would give you a false sense of security that you're improving something where you're actually creating a greater hazard.
That is the concern when we try to sometimes villages try to take a little bit of a blanket or a common sense approach to speed limits, like slower is always better. But you're right. It's a false sense of security because you see 25, you think 25, and someone's doing 37, or as an example.
But I guess part of and I understand exactly what you're saying, Trustee, and part of the theory is that if it's at 30 right now, I think what you're saying is no one's traveling 30, they're probably traveling 35 to 37. If we did that traffic speed study, you'd probably find the 85th percentile was above 30 miles an hour. If you lower it, are people, if it's a 25, are they more likely to go closer to 30, I guess is the point. And just in response to Trustee Kalusny's point, it doesn't have to, lowering the speed limit doesn't necessarily mean you have to take away or gain an extra space. It could be conjunction of the two of them, just trying to make it safer in general. But I understand your point that it's many people think that's a suggested speed limit, but I think over time, if people were educated, it's 30, now it's 25, maybe it slows it down a little bit, at least.
I'd be afraid to take away or add an additional spot without seeing what's being actually practiced.
Almost a speed, change it, do the speed study. If it recommended 25, come back, and then after so much time, take another speed,
Then
put
add
the
a
sensors out.
add the spot, and
Okay.
if people are actually following the suggested speed limit.
Okay, so Derek, is that enough direction in general to go forward with with the?
Would we like to do the speed study out there to have the information at least, and then come back and evaluate it?
I think so, yes. And I think, obviously there's a desire to do something and involve reduction in some of the parking spaces. I think everyone's leaning more towards your recommendation than IDOT. And again, this could be an incremental thing, and we would need to see it in place for a period of time. And again, how you measure the success of this will be difficult, because if you see a reduction in 2 accidents to 1 accident, it's going to be more just in general. Maybe it's the near misses, and again, we all know that there's a problem in that intersection, and 2 accidents is not a fair representation of how dangerous it is. So,
Correct.
all right. So this came up in the context of how it applied to grants, and now Derek, you want to go on about the additional options, or looking for direction? We'll try and get a consensus on what to do with grant.
Sure. So, fair warning, as the options, the lettering has changed, so design option B is now design option A. There was an order I wanted to present these in, so design option A is one we presented to you all 2 weeks ago. It includes widening of 7 feet on the north and the south side, total 14 foot of widening of the pavement. Provides an additional 13 parking spaces on the north side of Grant. That's from Grand to Prairie. Results in 2 11-foot wide dedicated through lanes and 2 7-foot parking lanes. Because of the widening, we do need to remove 17 trees, existing trees. We propose to plant 23 new trees. They could be installed at a more uniform spacing. An estimated cost for this option is $91,500. So nothing's changed from what we presented to you before on that option. If we could go to the plan
Derek,
view.
Before you go on, just looking at the drawings, are we talking just from Grand to Prairie? What happens from Prairie to Forest?
So from Prairie to Forest, what I've shown is 1.5 feet of widening, which was originally intended. I believe that, I don't know if there was discussion maybe maintaining that. I proposed to widen it 1.5 feet, which is our standard widening. Gives you more room for your emergency vehicles, snow plows. I will tell you, with no parking on the north side, you probably have enough sufficient room for snow plows and emergency vehicles at the current width. Part of what I had in mind, again, there's no tree impacts when you widen 1.5 feet. It's a little bit of extra cost just due to the additional pavement. Because this section of Grant is more like our typical side street with 1.5 feet of widening on each side, in the future, if you decided you were gonna allow parking on the north side because there's a demand for extra parking, you could still provide 7 foot on the north, 7 on the south, and have an 11-foot through lane. I think that makes sense for this area, but the board disagrees, then we would go back to maintain the existing 22-foot width,
Okay, so all three options are looked at that way.
the same.
Right, okay.
Right.
And I just want to make sure there's a clear consensus of the board, because in the length of the meeting last time, I might have framed, I think I got a consensus to leave, I said leave Grant the way it is, and I meant as Derek's recommendation with just widening it 1.5 feet on each side and no change in parking. So do the standard, what we would do, is everyone on board with that? Grant east of Prairie to Forest, widen it 1.5 feet on each side, as we do with the other streets. Is everyone okay with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, trustee Ketchmark, for bringing that up. Okay, so,
Okay, and moving on to option B, which was suggested at the last meeting by one of the trustees that we look into it a little bit. And that was to provide, we're widening the pavement by 7 feet, total of 7 feet. It would all be on the south side of the pavement. So that would reduce the South Parkway from 14.5 feet to 7.5 feet. The North Parkway would remain the same width it is now. You would have 2 11-foot through lanes and 1 7-foot parking lane. Of course, no increase in available parking. We're not adding any parking on the north. It would require that 5 existing trees be removed, all on the south side where the widening is. And we would propose to put in 10 new trees, and again, they can be installed at a more uniform spacing. Estimated cost is $45,000 for that option. We could look at it. So on this slide, and again, it just shows I know there's some questions about the alignment of the intersection. Between last meeting and tonight, we took a closer look at that. And essentially, the center line of the right-of-way remains the center line of pavement, so there's no issues as you cross from the east to west or west to east. And we also came up with an option C, and this wasn't something requested at the meeting. I kind of came up with it myself. So in option B, we're looking at a total of 7-foot widening. My understanding is we're talking about this issue is getting the additional parking spaces is the primary objective. The not having the dedicated through lanes is important. We want to have those, but maybe not quite as important as getting this additional parking, particularly when we did the site triangle analysis and realized that we're likely to lose a number of spots on Prairie. So what I came up with is we could do the 3.5 foot of widening on each side. So 3.5 feet of widening on the south and on the north. Takes your parkways down from 14.5 feet to 11 feet wide. It leaves a 15-foot shared through lane. 15-foot matches exactly what we have now out there with the no parking on the north. So that's where I came up with that through lane. That's plenty of room for emergency vehicles, plenty of room for the plows. You do have 2 cars parked opposite each other on the street. You won't have both cars passing at the same time on the through lanes. And you do get your 13 parking spots on the north side of Grant. No impact on the existing trees with the 3.5 foot of widening. And the estimated cost is $40,000. And again, with this one, if we could flip to the next exhibit, Tim, center line of the pavement remains essentially along the center line of the right-of-way. So it'll line up adequately with the pavement on the east side of Prairie. Those are the 3 options, yeah.
Derek, thank you for the visuals and the documentation, and I appreciate all that, and so does the board. Tim or Emily, just more, not so much for the board, but maybe for members of the public watching or here tonight, can you just summarize what the original staff recommendation, what the current staff recommendation, and the reason for bringing this forward in the first place was?
Sure, I'll take a shot at it. Staff looks at this, and actually Derek was the first one that brought it up, was, staff is aware that the goal of the village is to promote economic development and to promote it in the downtown area. We're seeing some signs of Grant has seen signs of interest. This is where I've got the cursor now, is the Gatto, the new multi-family building here. There are logical places right next door, on the corner, and then on down Prairie. There are some logical places where additional higher density development can happen on the south side of Grant. It would not happen on the north side of Grant. That is zoned for single-family use. Nobody's proposing that any commercial or high density goes on the north side of Grant, but this is clearly, Grant Avenue is a transitionary street. And this is our downtown, and therefore, if the village wants to see increased development, then we have to start planning and accommodating for how we're gonna handle it from a traffic management standpoint and from a parking standpoint. As we said at the meeting we had with the resident a couple weeks ago, we're not looking at that from right now. I think Brian had said, and he's right, that this widening is a solution without a problem. And I'd agree with him that as of right now, this street does function okay. It's not ideal. It's certainly not what you'd expect to find if you go to any suburban downtown area. This is not the kind of street you will typically find in a suburban downtown area, but it works. But from staff perspective, as I've said at that meeting, and I've said, I think 2 weeks ago, I'm looking at this from not what's good for right now, or not even what's good for next year, but we're probably not gonna touch the street, hopefully, if Derek does his job right, for the next 30 years. And I'm hopeful, and I think the board is hopeful, based on the zoning that's been made here, it's a TIF district now. The goal, as stated by the village board, is to create and to promote business and more development. And if that were to happen, I would say that the current configuration of Grant Avenue could be an impediment towards allowing for or incentivizing additional development. And so therefore, it seemed astute, and when Derek brought this to my attention, it sure seemed like, I've talked to Emily from a zoning perspective, it sure seems like the logical thing to do for the future of our downtown. And so that's why we came to you several meetings ago with the options that we've just talked about.
And it's still your recommendation for option A as listed tonight?
Yes.
Okay. All right, questions or comments for the board?
So Derek, whether it's B or C, the overall width of that lane is the same. They're both at 29 feet, correct?
Correct.
So one has parking on both sides with a 15-foot through lane, one is parking on one side with 2 through lanes at 11 foot each.
Correct.
So either way are at 29 feet.
And just to clarify, total widening the same. Option B, all 7 feet occur on the south side. Option C, 3.5 feet on each side. So it does take 3.5 feet off of the north side.
Right. I really like Derek's option because I think you achieve the parking situation. It will be the same amount of spots as option A overall. And I just think in the absence of having a 4-way stop at Grant and Prairie, if you open that up, right now with just the 15-foot through lane, that serves as a throttle almost for people that are going down that street. They're not gonna tend to drive as fast as they would if they have 2 open lanes. I think they're gonna go. And if there's no stop sign at Grant, I think there's just gonna be a greater propensity for accidents at that intersection, just by the not having those, the visual blocks on your peripheral vision, having the cars closer, I think causes you to drive slower. If you drive down my street versus driving down Maple, you travel faster, it's wider, it's 2 full lanes versus 1, even though there's parking on both sides of, you know, where we live. So I just afraid, if we could put a 4-way stop sign at Grant, then I'd be all for going the full 2 lanes and 2 rows of traffic, or 2 rows of parking. But I think not being able to do that, I would opt for design option C.
Derek, question for you on option B. Why is it we're doing the 7-foot widening just on the one side because of the trees?
Well, it's the commercial area, so we were One, not impacting the residential portion of, that was part of the discussions at one of the prior meetings, but it also, it helps the center lines stay aligned as we cross the intersection of Prairie, which was a concern.
Okay.
But we would get two through lanes, which I think is very important if we do want to build out that area in the future.
Trustee Ketchmark, anything else, or?
Yeah, I'm not sure which way to go on it.
Well, maybe, anyone else want to chime in? Maybe Trustee Klusny, you look like you're,
I sure do, thanks. I appreciate all of the work on this. I know it's been a lot of back and forth, so thank you for the time, everybody that's spent on it. I had an opportunity to talk with staff a little bit more about this, so appreciate your time further explaining all the options to me. I really struggle with losing the mature trees, and so I am leaning towards option C for the parking, especially if we're going to remove parking on Prairie, to make those sightlines change. But I do understand the economic development value of the two through lanes. I agree with Trustee Conroy, though, about the speed. That is a concern. I've been more concerned about losing the mature trees and the look of the space, and having new trees is awesome, but it takes a long time for them to grow back and be large again and provide that same value. I'm leaning towards C also, but I'm happy to keep talking about A if that's where other board members want to spend more time talking.
Trustee Cote?
When we first brought this up, the discussion was about the future of the business district and the economic value of that area. And it was brought up that night of going diagonal parking on one side, which I still like that idea, to increase the parking. That apparently is no longer desired by anybody other than myself. But the design option B, I am not married to. I brought that up as a possible concession because we seem to be right down the middle on this. I am still with the idea that we need to expand for the possible future. We are not building this road for 2025. We're building this road for 2050, 2045 timeframe. And when we look down the road, what do we want to have? If we're going to design for that, then widening it, you have to have two through lanes, and you need to increase the parking. And by increasing the parking there, then we can compensate for the item at Prairie, the sight lines. I agree that changing the speed limit down there may or may not, until we see an actual, I don't know if that's gonna buy us anything, to be honest with you. But I'm not in favor of design option C at all. I still think you have to have two through lanes. I am more than willing to go with option A to increase the parking if we can make it safer at the Prairie crossing, because that is a dangerous crossing right there. I do disagree that the speed would cause a problem, because if there is a stop sign, there's still going to be a stop sign. They'd have to blow through that stop sign to cause that problem. I would lean towards A in that case. I don't like C at all. We have to have two through lanes. There has to be back and forth traffic between the two collector routes.
Okay, Trustee Hendricks?
Well, I know that I don't support option B. I think that we definitely need the parking changes on Prairie, and as we take away those parking spaces, we need to replace them. And we need to replace them on Grant. So it's either A or C, and I think that Trustee Conroy makes very good points about having the two through lanes and the speed there making things less safe. I think design option C retains that residential feel, but also gives us room for development. But boy, this is a tough decision.
That's why we get paid the big bucks. So, I mean, Trustee Cote is solidly in favor of A. I mean, I think seems like option B is off the table.
That's fine.
Trustee Klusny indicated she favored C, but was still open to A. Trustee Ketchmark?
You know, I think C is what I was kind of bringing up at the last meeting with it. We do end up with additional parking with that. I mean, one of the issues this came forward was for additional parking. You know, you do end up with 13 additional spots here. If we're making changes on Prairie, as I mentioned at the last meeting, those cars are going to go somewhere. I'm not entirely convinced they end up going around the corner onto Grant, but there's 10 cars that now have to find parking spots. So whatever we do has to add parking spots to it. Option B does not do that. To Trustee Conroy's point about the increased speed, I think we talked about that at the last meeting too. You got, you know, 2 through lanes there, and I you know, cars do go slower when you have to wait for the other car coming by. I probably would lean more towards C.
Okay. Trustee Klusny, you said if you'd be open to, are you still in favor of C, or other board members, or?
I'm still in favor of C, but I'm happy to talk more about A if that's what everyone wants to keep talking about.
I mean, it seems like the board has obviously spent a lot of time on this and thought it through and weighed staff's recommendations, and staff's recommendations are what they are and the reason behind it. But I know staff also respects the board's knowledge of the area and experience in the area, and what steps, you know, there's always compromises involved here. And I think option C, as framed by Derek, and maybe, I think Derek did a good job of reading the board at the last meeting and coming forward with this option C, because it's somewhat of it's a compromise in that it offers, you know, the additional parking, which is what staff recommended, and I think a lot of us were in favor of, but it doesn't involve the total widening and total changing of the character of the neighborhood. So, I mean, it's, you know, Trustee Hendricks, this is not easy. It's not an easy decision, but it seems like the consensus of the board is option C.
Yeah, I argue that the feel of the neighborhood's gonna change in the next 20 years, and we have to be prepared for that, and if we go with that route, then we're not prepared for it, and that's, either way, I mean, just put it for the vote, and that's why we vote.
Well, there's no vote. This is,
No, I mean,
this is trying to get a consensus of Derek for drawing up, and I should have been clear on that, Derek drawing up the bid documents to put this street out to bid. This isn't
well,
a
then-
specific vote, it's more, that's why I'm seeking a
yeah, I'm not in
consensus.
favor of option C, but I mean, I can be outnumbered, that's fine. I'm not in favor of option C, it is what it is.
Okay. All right, well, it seems like it's option C carries the day. I mean, after a great deal of deliberation and thought and input, and thank you to staff, Derek, members of the public that offered their input on this, and we'll move forward with putting out to bid as option C. We've solved the issue of Grant east of Prairie to Forest, and we will come back with the speed study and the improvements that we can make to the intersection of Grant and Prairie to make that safer.
Can I ask one more question?
Absolutely.
Can we still fill in extra trees where the trees are missing?
No.
Even if I picked option C?
Of course we will, yeah.
Great.
Derek, anything else you need in terms of direction from the board on that?
No.
Okay. And
The widening, by the way, to 25 feet on the other half, right now you said there's no parking on either side.
That's correct.
So if we find that there's a problem with parking, we can allow parking on one side and still have plenty of room for emergency vehicles and passing.
by allowing park east of
Yeah,
Grant,
East of Grant.
we could revisit that in the
East of
future. I mean, that's an option too.
East of Prairie.
Allowing
Yeah.
parking
On one
on the
side,
north side,
yeah,
from Prairie to Forest.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
you can.
Because
I
we
talked
don't
to
truly
staff.
understand the sightline change. We're not gonna see, like Trustee Ketchmark said, it's not necessarily that they're gonna park over there, but we may have a different issue parking, and we have an option there to allow parking on the north side in the future if necessary.
You do. And if you did, by widening the 1.5 feet, you'd still maintain that 11-foot through
Right.
lane, shared through lane, which is what we have in most of our towns.
Yeah, I agree, because at the last meeting, trustee Kaluzny was bringing up, if we're gonna go 25 feet and keep it standardized throughout the neighborhoods, we should do it there as well, and keeping it there is good. Okay.
All right, thank you, everyone.
So just to clarify what President Garvey said, your actual vote will come when the bids come back in, and you'll be hopefully awarding a bid for this.
We're voting on a bid, not voting on the size.
Tonight.
I already lost, so we're
So
voting
did
on
I,
the
trustee
bid, yeah.
Quigley, so did I. So tonight, we're just looking for direction, which you provided, and now we will put the bids back together, and you will vote formally on
Yeah.
a contract.
On a contract.
Yes. Okay, the second item up for discussion under regular business is our second favorite infrastructure project attempting to be completed, the Eight Corners Fountain. Good evening, Carl.
Hey, good evening, President Garvey and Board of Trustees. How's everyone tonight? Happy birthday, Trustee Conroy.
And just for the members of the public, it's Carl Mule, our Public Works Director.
I come before you tonight to give you an update on the Eight Corner Fountain. So it's been a while. Just want to refresh everyone's memory that the village, after several discussions over several years, budgeted funds in 2021 for the construction of the fountain. Shortly after, we received notice of a $250,000 state grant funded by the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, or the DCEO. Bids were advertised in July of 2021, and staff began working diligently with the DCEO for grant-related requirements. The major requirement for the grant was a requirement for disadvantaged business enterprise, or DBE participation. DBE participation was the minority or disadvantaged contractors that participation needed to be included for the construction of the fountain. The DCEO could not provide exact DBE participation percentages at the time. In August 2021, the board awarded a contract to Integral for $641,200, which was reduced by a change order, and changed the contract amount to $598,080. Since August of 2021, staff has worked with the DCEO to determine the DBE participation percentage. Our recent conversation, the DCEO anticipated 8 to 12 weeks to get those results. DCEO also indicated that typically the DBE participation had ranged from 20 to 24% on other recent projects. Once this percentage is received, our contractor Integral will submit their utilization plan for review by the DCEO, and it should be noted that a utilization plan was submitted with the bids by Integral when it was awarded at 9.5% of DBE participation. At this point, the DCEO has two options. They can either require the contractor to go and increase the DBE participation, or they can award and prove it through a good faith effort. Once that's approved, it can take 4 to 8 weeks to have other grant requirements satisfied. So with that being said, putting together a tentative schedule for the upcoming Eight Corner Fountain, we have an estimated schedule to receive the DBE requirements at approximately April 18th. We would hope to have approval of a DBE utilization plan approximately May 30th. We would look to start construction of the fountain in June of 2022, obviously, and complete construction in September. It should be noted that the village has another option to move forward without state funding if they chose to do so. It's been discussed with staff, funds are available in the Eight Corner TIF district if needed. And saying that, it was also determined, there was a question asked to the DCO about possibly using this $250,000 on another project within the village in the future, and the answer was no. Staff is recommending that we follow the state's process. We revisit this process in May, and if we are no closer to the state making a decision at that time, we can assess other options. And now I'll just open it up to questions.
Thank you, Carl.
You're welcome.
I think this is an example of how government doesn't work.
Slows down.
What is confusing in the memo, where it talks about, they said to follow the Cook County rate, which is generally 34%.
So originally, we were told to use like a 34%, it was recommended. It was a recommended percentage to use by the DCEO, and that's all it was. And then after further discussion with the DCEO, they had said typically that projects were coming in at 20 to 24% for approval.
But what does that mean they're coming in at that? Isn't there a certain rate that they say it should be at, or does it vary from project to project?
One interesting note, I'm glad you mentioned that, is that we have a very unique project which can be harder to find contractors to meet the DBE requirements. Therefore, our percentage could be lower than the 20 to 24%, but there's no guarantee of what that percent will
I mean,
be.
because it's a fountain. and
Because the
fountain is
fountain's a unique project, and there are only certain a number of minority contractors that can do the work on this fountain.
Well, I know there's been communication with staff with them for some time now, but we're saying it's still middle of April before they'll decide what their percentage is?
Yes, sir.
That's crazy. That's crazy. I know. You know, what about the other $200,000 that the state awarded as part of this? There was the $250 for the grant, there was $250 for streets. We haven't been given that. We haven't been given anything on that. I mean, the state made a big fanfare about announcing all these projects, but the money, is the money even there? We hear how great the state is doing, but, you know, this is crazy, the length of time for this.
Trustee Ketchmark, you raised very legitimate points. Just to clarify this, the Cook County percentage, remember, we were proceeding on this project last year without, we didn't know the state money was gonna materialize. We hadn't heard anything for years. President Ketchmark, when you were president, President Garvey, once he became president, we would ask, and we never heard anything. So we proceeded as a normal capital project. Then, when we advertised the bids for this project in July, that's about the time that the state all of a sudden came out with this flashy press release saying, oh, we're gonna get this $250,000. Well, that's great. They don't tell you all the strings that are gonna be attached to that, but as Derek and Carl was scrambling to get these bid documents together, we said to the state, well, help us understand, what are you gonna require for this? And that's where the Cook County number came in. That's what they told us as advice. Well, if nothing else, use the Cook County number in your bid specs and go with that. And so that's what we did. That's why the Cook County number's referenced in here. At the time, we were scrambling. We were trying to get, we still don't wanna forget about the $250,000, but we were doing what we could to comply with the requirements that we knew about on a very short little leash.
So do we use the Cook County amounts within the bid specs? Was that part of that?
Yes,
Or-
that's correct. And I believe the reason is because they know that Cook County, it's a set amount. It's a set amount, and they felt that that would be conservative. In other words, they wouldn't come back. They do determine the DBE participation
On each
per
project.
project, and they felt that theirs would be lower, so we were safe going in with Cook County's, because when they get theirs, it'll be lower, and we can accept a lower amount, their amount. So
Well, I guess that brings up another point, that if Integral knew that rate, I mean, if Integral, complies with the rate, this is all a moot point, right?
That's correct.
But they're in at,
About
9.5%. And we're saying they knew going in that it was gonna be substantially more than that.
Very common to come in below, and what they have to do is provide a good faith effort. How much effort did you do to put forth to advertise to minority contractors? And they submitted that as part of the bid. And then it's up to DCEO to evaluate, is that acceptable? Again, as Carl's mentioned, because it's a fountain, it's specialty work. A lot of the cost is just in the fountain alone. That goes to a fountain manufacturer. We can't, and I don't even know if there are DBE firms that are manufacturing this fountain that was spec'd. My guess is there probably aren't.
Well, like every other grant we've gotten, we know there's strings attached to it. What's crazy here is the length of time to give us, an answer to what we need to do to comply. That's, and I still like to know whatever happened to the other $200,000 that,
And I have a call into Representative Zaluski. I mean, this was June of 2019 that the state made the big splash announcement that we were going to get $450,000, and $250,000 for the fountain that President Ketchmark at the time had, lobbied for and requested specifically, and they added a $200,000 infrastructure amount that we didn't really ask for, but we were happy to take. But that was June of 2019, going on 3 years ago, that they made this big announcement that we were going to get the money. And as Tim indicated, we started to move forward, expecting that the money was never going to be released, because we heard all the different stories and went through several different staff members trying to find out about it. So you could sense the frustration on staff's part and the board's part here, because we were ready to go forward without it, because this fountain needs to be done. I mean, Carl, is the fountain even functioning prior to the end of the year? Wasn't there
The end of the year, the pump had stopped working, and we did not replace it at the time, thinking that we would have a new fountain soon.
Okay. So,
right now, this spring, if we don't, you're not gonna have any fountain out there, right? It doesn't seem prudent to spend a lot of money to replace a pump on a fountain that we're hopefully gonna be replacing.
so staff's recommendation is to kind of, we're done everything that we can. We're kind of jumping through their hoops, and, Tim's kept me updated on the emails, and, the response time from the state has not been ideal, but Tim has been very diligent on trying to follow up with them and prod and get an answer from them. But the board might have a tough decision to make in the coming months, but we kind of wanted to put this up to give the board an update and see if you're comfortable with staff's recommendation of kind of moving along at this pace and making a decision sometime in May. I mean, because that's kind of our drop dead point. We could say we're not going to use the grant and we're going to go forward. We're going to put the project off till possibly next year again, that type of thing. Those are the decisions we'll have to make. But is the board okay with that tact in terms of taking it that way now?
I am.
Yeah, I would hate to dig into the TIF funds for an extra $250,000 when that money could go towards existing businesses, improving their properties, and making that overall area more attractive. So if we have to wait a few more months, and hopefully hear from the state.
And as staff indicated, we asked, can we use the $250,000 for another project in the area? I mean, even if we didn't use the $250,000 for this fountain, but it was available, maybe we could tie it into some other project in this area. But getting a direct answer from them is a challenge. I mean, they said no to using it elsewhere, but maybe we could use it for something similar or some improvements in the same area or for the same purpose. But great deal of frustration. But so, okay, I think let's monitor it and definitely bring it back in May, if not earlier, if we get some good news.
Okay.
Okay. That ends the items we have up for discussion under regular business. Before we go to public comment, I meant to mention this during the board meeting. There was two items that I wanted to mention that RB High School had a diver, Harrison Nolan, win the state championship this past weekend, and I wanted, on behalf of the board, congratulate Harrison. He not only won the state championship in diving as a senior, but he set a state record. So that was this weekend downstate, and they had a welcome back for him. And I also came to be aware today that a Brookfield resident who attends Fenwick High School, Michael Flynn, won the state championship in 2 different swimming events. And like I said, Michael and his family are residents of the village of Brookfield. So for a town that doesn't have a pool, we're doing pretty good. Congratulations to Harrison Nolan and Michael Flynn and their families and their schools for their excellent performance. So now I'll go back to public comments. Anyone on this side? Patrick?
How's it going?
Good, Patrick. If you could come up to the microphone and just give us your name and address for the record.
Sure. I had a presentation prepared. I don't know how I can share that, or you can follow along with it. My name is Patrick Coy. Sorry for the informality. I came from work. However, I come to you today to present the idea of an ESG report. By a raise of hands, does anybody know what an ESG report is? 1, 2.
And I know because you told me, so.
Anybody? So, I'm just gonna kind of read off my slide here, just because I can't access it right now. But, so what an ESG report is, it's within the context of publicly traded organizations, it comes out probably yearly. 9 out of 10 publicly traded organizations do an ESG report, and ESG stands for Environmental Social Governance. And this kind of goes around the transforming business landscape that has been going on. And you might be asking yourselves, what does this have to do with the Village of Brookfield? And my idea is, also, this might have some context in my background. I'm just graduated from the University of Illinois Natural Resources and Environmental Science and bachelor's, and I've worked in other environmental fields, ecological restoration, and I'm doing air quality assessment right now with a company. So my entire idea with an ESG report is to mainly set goals, standards, checklist for the community, and to inform the people of our community what we'll be doing to maintain a green initiative within the coming years. And a big part of this is driven by, within the 10 and 15 years when Gen Z, my age, 1997 to 2012, people that were born within that range, have the money to put down, a down payment on a house, they're probably gonna look for something like this, like a report, maybe just like a piece of paper saying what we've done in the past, how many years, and what we're going to do. And this this report would weave in through infrastructure, residential buildings and homes, public spaces, businesses, how to conserve water, energy, and food. And kind of the theme of an ESG report is mainly about outreach, transparency, around budgets, goals, and ideas around the public, community land, and conservation efforts. The root of this report will highlight how we can stay ahead of the curve of environmental issues and interests for the people in our community. Potential topics could be EV charging stations, solar panels, volunteerism through public workshops, such as rain gardens, botany and ornithology. Botany, study of plants; ornithology, study of birds. And infrastructure, permeable versus impermeable surfaces, parking lots, streets, alleys. The Salt Creek, it flows through. There's a great running path I utilize all the time. Also bioswales, forest preserves, and public parks. And just to be transparent with you, I don't know exactly where our public parks are separated from county land to our own, what we can do to them. So just a little ignorance on my part. But in conclusion, I believe this is a way to increase the interest and dialogue in our community about the future of Chicagoland areas and communities. Increase residential home values, beautify our homes and businesses, develop a better ecological footprint, build a better local economy, and that's pretty much it. Do we have any questions?
Any board members have any questions? Patrick is a neighbor of mine, approached me, said he wanted to make some public comments. He informed me about the topic, and I knew it was of interest to the board. I mean, the board, as we've talked about sustainability, environmental issues, and I know Trustee Conroy specifically, asked that, measuring goals going forward and making plans, how it ties into everything we do. So I think Patrick's presentation hits home to all of us in terms of how we move forward with his goals. I think it just so happens that Trustee Kaluzny made an announcement earlier tonight about some efforts of the Conservation Commission, so.
You should come to our March 9th meeting.
Yeah, totally. Also, if you don't want to replace as many trees, you could also just do like prairies, because like trees versus different types of conservation where it comes to like building and storing CO2, it might be better to just do like a bunch of different like native flowering, versus a tree, because the lifespan maybe 50 years or something like that. So that was just my thought about it, but anyway.
No. Obviously, you have experience and expertise in this area, and I know you're active and involved in the community and want to be. I think as a starting point, because I talked about trying not to necessarily duplicate efforts or forming necessarily new commissions or things, but the Conservation Commission is kind of on a similar tact, and I think your presentation and information would fit in. So I was going to tie you into Trustee Kaluzny. If you can't make the March 9th special Conservation Committee meeting, I think I'll have you exchange information, and then Trustee Kaluzny can report back, and then the board can decide what other ways we can kind of maybe take your idea moving forward.
Yeah, thank you very very much. Any other feedback before I?
If you haven't read it, you should definitely take a look at the sustainability plan that we voted on a few months ago now.
It's the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus Climate Plan for the region. We endorsed the plan, and now for the region, we're working on something locally, more specific to Brookfield. So I would recommend, I'm familiar with ESG, and it's definitely more company-focused.
Yeah.
But looking at the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus has the framework for sustainability plans. You can download a spreadsheet. I can get in touch with you afterwards, but it has very similar things, but kind of more municipal related for each of those sections of the ESG.
Sure. Yeah. I'm just here as a resource and
Yeah, that's great.
village member. So thank you very much for your time.
Patrick, if I could also just interject as well. I mean, this is absolutely wonderful. We would love, I mean, our carbon footprint needs to be taken into account with every decision we have. It's not only, it's a responsibility more than anything to your generation and those that follow you, but we would love to get you involved and your voice active. I mean, people come out to the Project Nice, they see a lot of us fuddy-duddies out there, and to have someone in your age group to represent your demographic will help drive attendance and bring people out, so.
Yeah, and I think there's a big misconception around like greenism or whatever you want to call it. Like, I'm very kind of conservative in my beliefs of like what can be done. So I think being realistic about it is very important to this whole framework. So.
Well, we're big on building bridges, literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
So,
In principle.
in principle at least, yes. So we would love to have you as on the forefront with that and reaching out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming out tonight, Patrick. I know you've had a long day, so.
Yes, no problem.
Okay, anyone else on my right side? And on my left, CP?
In the spirit of the environmental thing, is it working? I guess it is.
And CP Hall from,
CP Hall, 3837 Woodside. I live up against the forest preserve behind my house and across the alley. But tonight I'm worrying about the forest preserve that's behind us back here. You're apparently planning to do a burn, and I want to say the second or third time we burned that forest preserve. Because, as you put it, it's not a really hot fire, it's just a sort of workaround fire, spreading fire arrangement. You don't get a lot of heat, and therefore you don't get a lot of lift of the carbon dioxide and all the ash and everything else straight up. I know that a former village president's wife, who was living over in the vicinity where we're talking about doing the Grant and Prairie Avenue thing, was by the, like I say, the second or the third time around that we burned in Kiwanis Park, we gassed her. And she was, she had asthma. And she had walked out of her house not knowing it was gonna happen because nobody thought they needed to advise people that far west. Especially since prevailing wind normally comes out of the west and would be blowing the other direction. And I would like to suggest that you maybe expand the area that we are notifying people when you finally come up with the decisions that we're gonna go. It just is a matter of safety.
Yep, that's helpful. Thank you.
and staff did post a notice on the village website about the upcoming burns and that more information would be available, and it was shared through our various social media feeds also. So I appreciate it. That's a good reminder, CP. We do want to try and get the word out, and I'm sure that maybe the local newspaper might help us get the word out also, so as things move forward, so. Okay, anyone else on my left side? Okay, hearing no further public comments, there's no need for executive session. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn at 8:05 PM.
So moved. Second?
Motion was made by trustee Conroy, second by trustee Cote. Roll call, please.
Trustee Ketchmark?
Aye.
Trustee Cote?
Aye.
Trustee Hendricks?
Aye.
Trustee Conroy?
Aye.
Trustee Klusny?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, we're adjourned at 8:06 PM. Thank you for coming, everybody.